All right, so this is January 9th, 2020. What's up with that? Government cover-ups. We're here at 26 2nd Avenue and East 1st Street every Thursday, or at least many Thursdays. If you look at our YouTube channel, which is Krishna Was Up, KRISHNAWAZZUP. You go there, you'll see what the past episodes were like, and I'm recording this one, so it should be up in 2 or 3 days. And again, it's in 2 segments. The first segment I just did, but for YouTube, it's better if things are around 20 or 30 minutes, so that's why I break it into 2. And in this particular segment, we're going to go on and talk about Rendlesham Forest episode or incident, the Hudson Valley Wave, the Belgian Wave, the Phoenix Lights, Area 51, the Navy Air Force disclosure of 2004. So that's what we're going to go into now. So this is part 9, government cover-ups. So part 8 was also government cover-ups, but now we're moving further ahead. So this is what we're dealing with here. Rendlesham Forest, which happened in 1980. The Hudson Valley Wave, which was between 1982 and 1990. The Belgian Wave, which was between 1989 and 1990, around the same time as the Hudson Valley. The Phoenix Lights, which happened almost a decade later at 1997, of course, Area 51. And the final, most recent thing, the Navy fighter plane video release of 2004. So we see how, roughly every 5-10 years, some major thing bubbles out and becomes a major thing. And we hear about it, and people opine this and think about that and debate this and that and the other thing. And what's interesting about many of these is they involve a number of people. Some of them, like the Belgian Wave, the Hudson Valley, involve hundreds of people who were at one point either witnesses or, lived in the area and saw things that they couldn't explain. So let's talk about it here. So we've got Rendlesham Forest. A lot of people call this the Roswell of the UK. There's a military base in the UK, which during the Cold War was rented or leased to the United States military. So the United States is in the United Kingdom, in England, in Rendlesham Forest. And there are a couple of RAF stations not far from there, Bentwaters and something else. So there are some nearby military installations that are actually UK owned and operated. But this one was operated by the US government, at least at that time. And there was the story that Sergeant Bud Steffens and Airman First Class John Burroughs saw some lights, and they went to investigate. And they came back kind of all out of sorts. And then this Sergeant Jim Peniston was called in to investigate, and he got some more people, and they went back to the location. Bud Steffens wouldn't go back, but the rest of them went back. And what's really bizarre about this is he had a tape recorder with him, and he tape recorded them going trekking into the forest, communicating with each other to try to figure out what was going on here. And so they go bouncing into the forest, and they see these lights, and Peniston is the one that actually has the real close encounter. He watches the thing descend, land on the ground. He goes up and touches it. And he had a lot of guts, I guess, to go up and do that. At any rate, he touches it, and then the whole report would have been completely circular filed. That, none of this would have ever come out anywhere except for Halt, which is Lieutenant Colonel Charles I. Halt, who said, wait a minute, we can't just sweep this under the rug. And he made a thing out of it. And so people began to hear about it. And so there was a recording, I guess it was Halt's recording, that they went back there. This happened over 2 or 3 episodes. There was one episode where they saw it, and another episode where Peniston actually touched it. And he was very stressed out by the whole thing, and eventually he went through some therapy. And one of the hypnotic regressions, evidently he was actually talking to the aliens. They came out and spoke with him, but he doesn't remember that in his testimony when he's explaining it to the military. They went back there, they found radioactivity, they found what appeared to be some kind of landing marks where the craft landed. There's a monument there now. If you go there, they built what looks like some kind of monument, I guess made out of stone, or perhaps it's concrete or something like that, which is shaped like this craft, and people go there and visit it near Bentwaters in this Rendlesham Forest. Of course, the news media, both the UK and the US news media, wrote this off as them seeing a faraway lighthouse and misinterpreting it in some kind of way as a craft landing. Of course, you can see how far sometimes they have to stretch the reality of what happens to make it appear like an ordinary event, and people are blowing it out of proportion, thinking that there's some kind of amazing thing going on here. So this is, of course, what, as we were saying, Rendlesham Forest is kind of the UK's version of Roswell. It broke the whole concept open in the UK. And this Nick Pope wrote a whole book about Rendlesham Forest. Of course, you hear about Nick Pope a lot. He's a big guy in the media of UFOs. Hudson Valley Lights. This is close to home. This is New York State. This happened over from 1982, 1983 to 1986. Some say it was going on much later, where lots of people were seeing strange, like constellations of lights. They weren't a single light moving in an odd pattern. They were a whole group of lights which looked something like a boomerang. And this is probably the right point to bring up this, how we begin to see this transition from what seem like saucers into what seem like triangles or boomerangs or some kind of strange looking wing thing with no fuselage, So we begin to see this sort of taking the fore. Of course, the saucers haven't really gone away. They're still around too. But this constellation of lights, very similar to what we will see and talk about in a minute in the Belgian sightings, and very similar to what we'll see in the Phoenix lights, this idea of some kind of an angled fixture, an angled craft of some kind or another. So, of course, people took videos of these. I've seen a couple of the videos that were taken of the Hudson Valley lights. Eventually, this happened so much that people just started making caucuses where they would have these, meetings and discuss, why isn't the government doing something about this? People were kind of disturbed about this. Now, how did the government respond? They responded by essentially not responding. However, some of the more, ones who had videotaped something, they did send out military people to see if these things had some credence to them or whether they were good video of the lights themselves. And the citizens wanted something done about this, and the government never really answered them. Just kind of let the whole thing drift. And they were on the official story that they didn't believe UFOs existed. This is why they get put in this, they painted themselves into a corner. If they come out and then say, well, we're going to do something, then they admit they exist, and they don't want to do that. So they have to kind of work this strange game where people who are disturbed about it have no one to turn to. And if they call the military, they'll just say, go back and watch television or something. Don't worry about it. So this is kind of how this was working. So this was not that long ago, about 30 years ago here in New York State. But this happened in other places. We have the Belgian Wave, and this was even more amazing. Over about 2 or 3 years, many of these more triangular and strangely shaped objects were seen over the country of Belgium. Belgium's not a big country. And of course, the Belgian military, the Airforce, was scrambled to find out what these things were, because lots of people were seeing these. And they were being seen all over the country. So the military had to do something. They saw them on their radar, and the military tried to catch them, and they couldn't. And after much research, this was the first time that a military and their main leaders came out and said, "Yep, these things are there. We don't know what they are. We can't catch them. We don't know what they're up to. So you go figure. We can't do anything about them." So I guess in a country like Belgium, you can get away with that. You can't get away with that in the United States. But it's interesting to watch these various military people in the country of Belgium just come out and flatly admit, "I saw it, my unit saw it, the aircraft, they saw it, they had a lock on it, and then it disappeared," and all this kind of thing. So this particular photo, I think, is one that's debated as whether it's hoaxed or not. Did somebody really take a picture of one of these, or is it some kind of CGI? These days, photos don't count for much because it's too easy to fake this stuff now. So this was the Belgian Wave. And of course, the Phoenix lights. This was another this is another thing where hundreds of people in the city of Phoenix see this thing, and they're claiming it's flares from a drop from an airplane. I mean, does this look like flares? I mean, it's in perfect formation. You can't drop flares in a perfect formation, and they fall. They don't stay in one place. And there were people who took videos of this. And what's interesting is I think the most interesting part of this is the governor of Arizona, Fife Symington, at that time. He actually did get concerned that people were becoming emotionally up in arms and overwrought by this. So he had a news conference where, he said, "We've gotten to the bottom of this and we're going to reveal it." So they had the media there and many people there, and it was in some government location. And then they brought a guy out in an alien suit, and, everybody had a har. And, he said, "You all are taking this all too seriously," which is interesting. He was afraid that there could be some kind of mass panic happening, so he kind of played it down. A few years later, after he was no longer governor of Arizona, he came forward and said, "Actually, I saw it myself, and it wasn't flares." Here you have a governor of a state coming out and saying that he saw it. So that's a different thing. So there's a lot of these kind of things. There's one, the reason I'm not bringing it up, in Mexico or Mexico City, similarly, people all over Mexico City saw this group of craft flying around, some couple, 3 dozen of them, and took videos of them. But that wasn't, at least the American military wasn't involved in that kind of things, These are stories that are just happening all over, that we see that this is a deep, dark thing, and that people know what they saw, but usually it takes actually seeing it. As I was saying earlier, first you've got to believe that there are things flying around, and as Nick Pope says, and as Richard Thompson also says, what's striking about them is they don't have shapes that we recognize as aerodynamic shapes. They're not any kind of craft that anyone has ever seen or knows about flying in the sky. And they can perform aerial maneuvers that we think are impossible. So there's some kind of physics going on that we don't understand. These things can fly 3,000 miles an hour and not create a sonic boom. Anything we've got that goes even remotely that fast has to make a sonic boom. And, how they take right turns. Any human body that was in there with those kind of inertial G-forces would turn into jello the minute they turned one of those kind of turns. But somehow these craft appear to be able to do this. So we're wrapping up here. Of course, Area 51. I guess the major news story here was that some months ago, in fall of last year, there was a internet meme that all these kids were going to go storm Area 51. That kids would show up from all over the country, all over the world, and they would all go running onto Area 51, thinking that whoever they were that were protecting Area 51 wouldn't be able to stop all of them. Of course, that turned into a big fizzle. It never really happened. Instead, they had some big UFO thing in nearby city, and they listened to rock music instead. But at any rate, there was this idea. Of course, for many years, the government denied that Area 51 actually existed. You couldn't go there. And if you tried to go there, you would be stopped by the camo dudes, as they call them, these guys that drive around in SUVs and Jeeps in camouflage outfits, and they, grab people if they try to go over the line. Nevertheless, it doesn't exist, as far as the government was concerned. But now, of course, I think the government cops to the fact that Area 1 exists. Of course, the most interesting aspect of it is it was one of the homes for the Skunk Works, which was a special wing of the military-industrial complex that designed experimental aircraft that was of special kinds, that was beyond what we know and beyond what we generally hear about. So this Skunk Works has developed these, reconnaissance planes, the SR-51 or whatever it is, and the other various kinds of special military planes that fly very fast, and the one that's radar invisible, et cetera, et cetera. All these were designed by the Skunk Works. And so that's what kind of is the unofficial story the military lets out about this area, because they don't want people going there. But then we have the whole thing with Bob Lazar, who maybe you've heard of. He's also one of those big figures in the ufology history book. He's, of course, still alive. But Bob Lazar evidently was a young college guy who got hired in Area 51. And when he went out there to work, he had to sign all these disclosures, and he had to appear when they wanted him to appear and not when they didn't want him to appear. And he had to go in this mysterious bus with all the windows blacked out and drive to the middle of the desert from Vegas or wherever they come from. And when he got out there, at one point he gets introduced into a hangar where there's a real UFO, and his business or his job was to help reverse engineer it. So he wasn't just one, but several of them, and he gets involved in this reverse engineering idea. And after some time, they stop calling him. And so he wonders, well, what's going on here? Have I been out of a job? And he realized that he had all this classified information. So if they didn't need him, and he had all this classified information, what's his status? So he began to think, well, maybe I should just tell somebody, so if I disappear in the middle of the night, at least everybody will know what happened. And, I have something over them if they know I'm going to say at least this much. And if they push me, I'll tell them I'll say more. So I've got something over them. It didn't quite work out that way. They did get him, and they did put him through the 3rd degree and this and that and the other. And these days, there's a lot of people who think he's just a loony. And he's completely kind of out of the idea of talking about his experiences of 51 in the modern times. But at one point he was. At one point he went to a television station and he gave an interview with a television interview with a newspaper reporter. I forget what his name was, and they discussed the whole idea of his work, how he got out there, what he was doing, how these extraterrestrial craft work. He talked about the physics involved, that it's some kind of anti-grav. It has to do with elements that don't exist on planet Earth but are made in some kind of, they can be made for just split seconds in some kind of atom smashers and so on and so forth. And these are the source of the energy and how the anti-grav works. And so these were part of the whole ethos. And again, the government's not telling us anything about it. And we get into this whole idea of black projects, which are projects that are funded by funds that the government doesn't know anything about. If somebody asks, the Congress is not voting for these projects. Where are they getting the money for them? Nobody knows for sure. What are these black projects? Where are they getting the money? Are they getting it from dealing in drugs? Are they getting it from extortion? Are they making the money themselves? Nobody knows. It's one of those things that, this recent thing that came out of somebody lost $2 or $3 trillion, is this black project money that's just disappearing? Could be. But somewhere, somebody's paying for these things. And how they're doing it, nobody exactly knows. So finally, here we're going to talk about today this Naval Air Force disclosure, 2004, the most recent. For years, the military denied that it had any interest in UFOs or had any programs dealing with it. But we discover just recently that this Luis Elizondo goes on. This was an interview with the New York Times, and this was who broke the story, that there is this government program called ATIP, Advanced Aeronautics Threat Identification. That's what it is, ATIP. And this program has been going on for a while. And what does ATIP do? It tries to understand what these UFOs are. Now, there's a new word you probably already run into, or maybe you haven't, UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. That is kind of the new buzzword that used to be UFO, because some people like that term better, and it's kind of free from UFOs that have been dragged through the mud and slopped around and puked on and everything for decades now. Now we have a new word, UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. This is how the military relates to them and other things. And so what brought this out, you can see this on the internet pretty easily, this fighter footage of them and their radar lock-on to something that's moving at some ridiculous rate of speed. And the whole thing is part, as I mentioned earlier, a naval exercise that happened off the coast of San Diego, I think before 2004. I don't know what the date was that it actually occurred. But these Navy aircraft were performing some kind of aerial maneuvers, and they saw these things which are described as tic-tacs, as I said, kind of white, cylindrical and spherical on the ends. And the only other thing that you could see out of them were two L-shaped antennae that came off of one end. And no means of propulsion, no visible means of propulsion, no means of navigation, no tail fins, no wings, nothing like that. And yet they're flying around, and these pilots are saying, "Woo, watch it, look at that go." And one pilot was chasing one, and it dives down towards the ocean. So the pilot followed it down towards the ocean. When he gets to the ocean, he realizes that there is a bigger one, maybe 10 or 20 times the size, but it's under the water. And then the one that he was chasing shoots up, and he starts to follow it up again. So what were these things? This was an aircraft carrier, and these are not people who are smoking a joint behind a barn somewhere. These are people who are actually Air Force personnel, not only Air Force personnel, but people who are trained to defend our country against military threats. And they're being flown circles around by these things that seem to defy physics. They seem to defy what we know of physics in our modern day. How do they do this? We don't know. But they exist. And as we can see, what do these events tell us? They tell us that there's something going on and we don't know what it is. And so here is another new word, USOs, unidentified submerged objects. So sometimes we see that these, UFOs go into the water and then they come out again. Maybe there's special ones that just live under the water, or there's some say that they're bases under the ocean where these, or under other bodies of water that are not the ocean, where these UFOs have some kind of their own UFO installations. And it makes it very difficult for us in our everyday world to know anything about them. So all these things are part of the overall phenomenon. And when you learn more about this, idea of disclosure, will Dr. Greer be able to force some kind of large scale disclosure? Maybe, maybe not. Personally, I'm not holding my breath. I think that the Navy and the Air Force and the government in general will do their damnedest to make sure that as little comes out as possible. And whatever does come out will probably be sown with rotten Easter eggs to put people in the wrong direction. So that because they don't want people going down certain paths and learning about certain things. There's too much for them to lose. In some cases, it's reasonable why they think that way. In other cases, it's not so reasonable. And what's actually the more difficult pill to swallow is that our government is becoming a thing that has no connection to the people it supposedly serves. Little by little, it's becoming like that. And our military is becoming a group of people who take action and don't care about what the rest of anybody else thinks, even Congress, even the president, whoever. They don't care. They've got their own agenda and they're going to follow it. So, any rate, this is kind of an overview. And in the next episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about the nature of the way that these different, or at least some of the theories of how these different groups interact, the government, the private sector, the people who are developing for the government, various, industries, the people in security, the people that are running the government, because that's there. And we'll probably talk about some other aspects. I think there's at least one more session in the government cover-up aspect of the UFO phenomenon. But that won't happen until January 30th. So today is January 9th. But I'm really snowed under by a lot of things, and I'm going to India for March. So I have to get a lot of things kind of squared away. And probably January 30th will be the session that I'll do that'll follow this one up. And the next session won't be till March 1st when I get back from India. So I may do another Stories from the Vedas, but I even doubt that. Unless I start making more progress on all the things that I have to do, better progress than I've been making so far. So, okay. Realizations, questions, further discussion. Anyone from our...
You won't be in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I won't be here the next 2 weeks. That's right. There'll be nothing going on here, at least on Thursday.
Well, I got around the country to a lot of UFO. Okay, thank you. I've gone to many UFO conferences around the country.
Mm-hmm.
And there was Stanton Friedman. He was in Phoenix. He was at that UFO Congress International how do you put it? UFO conference, Congress, UFO, whatever. Anyway, Stanton Friedman was furious. He was debunking the one there from Area 51, that young man, the young man that was at Area 51.
Oh, Lazar.
Yeah, he was saying that his credentials, they were false. He was just, he would just continue saying that he wasn't a scientist.
Right, he wasn't credible.
He was incredible. So he was not credible, and it was sad. It was really sad to hear this. So I noticed that many other people in this UFO community, that they debunk each other. And I see this on Facebook. I see this on Twitter. I see this many that, you know, we're not going to get this together. I mean, I'm still hanging in there. This gentleman, he sees what I had for over 3 years. He can vouch. He can vouch that he's seen my UFOs, and I believe I showed it to you as well here. And I don't know where to go with this. I had the UFOs flying in all directions in Central Park. There was a group that was with me. The name of the group was the Disclosure. And I went to see Dr. Stephen Green in Washington, D.C., and I told him about, I had UFOs flying in all directions in Central Park. He came on and said, I heard. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I thought we were all in this together to try to help wake up the world. And, you know, he's an ambassador, I'm an ambassador, and I thought all his ambassadors were in this to more or less try to help wake up our world, that we're not alone. And that Area 51 and the Area 51s around the world is the Russia's Kapustin Yard, Gobi Desert is the Area 51 in China, and Pine Gap is the Area 51 in Australia. And they control our military. These extraterrestrials are controlling our militaries in the world, and they give us advanced technology. And the one that controls all these military industrial complexes around the world are the reptilians down in Antarctica. That's the biggest one. And the Germans were there, the Nazis were there in the 1930s, and they had a space program that they put colonies of Germans on the moon and Mars in 1943. It's on the internet. You can see all that. And we control. I'm trying to wake up the world to know the facts of when we learn from the past, we will have some idea about the future, because these people, they scheme, they plan all this. So this is a very difficult task. And, you know, I still got to hang in there. I can't give up because we're all, you know, we all live on this planet, and I don't know who to turn to. I approach the people on Ancient Aliens, and that they're all talking behind my back. They say, I traveled the world and how many UFOs appear. I had the opportunity to speak on stage when I was up in Brantford, Ontario, and I told everyone, you go outside and I'm going to point out these UFOs. After Stephen Bassett went on stage, this is in June of 2016, and he told the audience that if Hillary Clinton becomes president, she will reveal disclosure. And then there was a Grant Cameron, and he got on stage and said the same thing, that if Hillary Clinton becomes president, she will reveal disclosure. This is June of 2016. And both these gentlemen, they've been going to the White House for 17 years for Grant Cameron and 21 years for Stephen Bassett. And they've been telling the UFO community of which president's going to reveal disclosure. And I've been writing these two. I approach them face to face all over the United States and Canada. I said, no president's going to reveal disclosure. I told them, take me to the White House or put me on Ancient Aliens and let me share this with the world so I can convince billions of people we're not alone. And, you know, the world will, together, we will seek the truth together of what's been going on. Because, you know, we're going to let these whatever, 500 or 1,000 people in Washington control our country and the world and hide all this was really going on, that, we're all in trouble. So this it's a very difficult thing. And I still trying to approach this. I mean, I got to get back to these conferences and just keep talking to people. I said, what exactly do you want? Because every time I go to these UFO conferences, I hear someone in the audience say, when are we going to have disclosure? And I turn around and I'm baffled. I'm saying, a lot of people know I have this, and why are they so naive that, they say, we need you. We need you to help us and help the world to wake up. For all of us, I tell them, in order for all of us to wake up the world, we need to wake each other up first. All our open-minded people to wake each other up first, to get together and not attack each other. And we need to do this to wake up the world, because our world is doomed. I mean, there's too many problems. There's too many problems that cannot be resolved. Let's face reality. Mm-hmm. We poison this planet. We destroy it. We are our own worst enemies. We have problems that we're not sure we can resolve. These corporations, they poison us. This military-industrial complex. This is it's a very serious thing. We don't know what's going on with the Space Force. That you had Emmanuel Macron about 13 weeks ago say he wants Space Force, and he mentioned something about satellites. What's he talking here? Are there extraterrestrials destroying the satellites over France? I mean, this is disturbing. He's not explicit of what's going on. Neither is Donald Trump with Space Force. And Vladimir Putin, that he wants to put his people on the moon and Mars in 2019. Here we are in 2020, and we don't know what's going on with other worlds and on the moon, with all these people, all these leaders in the world. There's over 70 countries in the world that are involved in space. And it's crazy. We don't know what's going on. And we've been having these movies ever since the crash of Roswell. The movies in Hollywood, they've been portraying all these science fiction movies with benevolent extraterrestrials and malevolent extraterrestrials, and people, they look at that, they think it's fantasy, they think it's like something that's over a person's mind is made up out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. But it is actually when we see these things, it's actually going on. So it's ludicrous. When we see Star Wars, this is actually going on. It was going on with the German Nazis with reptilians. Then they had that super space. They had that super Airforce. They had the US Airforce space program with the German Nazis, reptilians, in the 1950s. And then in the 1970s, you had the Nordics with the US Navy to create the US Navy super secret space program. Mm-hmm. Right? There was a US Air Force super space program. I'm getting the words mixed up because I'm trying to think everything, and it's like I've been doing so much and reading different books. I can't even get the words right. Mm-hmm. So anybody listen to this, forgive me, but the thing is that if you look this up, the gentleman's name is Michael Salla, Salla, and he talks about Antarctica or what's been going on. I mean that's like the headquarters to these projects of what's going on, because the German Nazis were involved since the 1930s, and I just mentioned previous, that in order for us to have some idea about the future, we have to look at the past, because they've been scheming for decades with what's going on with extraterrestrials and humans and having our military. I mean, this people say, what do they want with us? But it's like when Star Trek started or Flash Gordon started, and we see it in the movies or see it on television, that's actually happening. We have that in space. With Spock is an extraterrestrial. Mr. Spock is an extraterrestrial, and the reptilians are the Klingons, and that's true to life. There was Gene Roddenberry, he picked up that book from the son of an admiral. I forgot the name of the admiral, okay? Because it was a true story. Mm-hmm. And Gene Roddenberry picked up on that story and he created Star Trek. And this is what it's all about. So anybody like listening to this, you could, do your own research and look that all up. So, and again, it's in these books of the US Air Force Secret Space Program and the US Navy Secret Space Program. It's incredible. It's been hidden from the world for many decades, for 70, 80 or more years. It's crazy. Thank you for letting me speak my mind here about it.
Well, one response that I would give is that the entire strange sort of scaffolding of many different seats of power. There's the possible various different alien races. There's various different groups within our own government. There's various different groups that are financial, like the bankers and this and that and the other. There's various kind of sort of locations or focal points of material power. And of course, above them all is the supreme. And at some point, those who are really serious about power, they want to be known as the powerful. So right now, maybe they're hidden, but at some point, even by their own desire, they will make themselves known at a point where they believe that we can't do anything about it then, But in any case, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, that everyone has to get their juice from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't necessarily have to fight a war at some point along the line. That could easily actually happen. That could be part of the future. That's what did happen 5,000 years ago, that there may be a war. Maybe not. Maybe it'll just undo itself. Now, the reason wars happen is because there's a lot of bad karma. Wars are very hellish. And it's a mass sort of time period for a lot of people to burn off a lot of bad karma. So if there's enough people who are involved in a purificational process, then that may be averted and the whole karma will be burned off in a more subtle, in a less drastic way. But it could go that way also. And for those who are serious about spiritual life, whatever happens, whether our planet is poisoned or it isn't poisoned, whether some one world government with some dystopia comes to overcome everything, or it doesn't happen, whether this happens quickly or it happens slowly, whether various extraterrestrial races are known and come forward and make themselves visible on our TV screens, or they don't. It all boils back down to what we have to do as individuals, which is to engage in our own spiritual life. If enough of us do, that's what will make an ultimate change. And it may come to the point where the Supreme will reveal that we need to go into some kind of conflict. Or maybe it won't happen that way. But at least at this stage, with everything being under wraps, and there's no way to get any real knowledge about anything. That's why I don't particularly take it too seriously when people believe something or don't believe something, because there's a lot of disinformation out there. And some people may be agents of disinformation, or they may not be. And the only way to know is to spend, practically speaking, some ridiculous chunk of your life investigating details. And then you'll know about a particular issue, whether that particular issue is correct or not. But life's too short for that. So instead, we can, personally, I just feel myself satisfied knowing the basic gist or the grand scheme of things, and understanding that at some future point, things are never this gray for long. Eventually, either the powers that are trying to control the world will collapse, and then they won't be able to hide themselves, or else they'll step forward and show us the bars that we have to live with now. You know, one of those two things is going to happen, and at that point it won't be so vague anymore. But again, they're still not going to be playing straight up with us either way. But part of the nature of the world we live in is that we'll never know everything, and we'll never know everything, especially as far as details go. But if we know the grand scheme of things, and we know what is important, which is our own spiritual development, then however, things toss out, in the coming decades, whether we live to see it or we don't, whether the aliens come out front or they don't, whether we're put behind some totalitarian system or we're not, whether we poison the planet and most of us die off or we don't, whatever those various scenarios play out, if we're concerned with our own spiritual life, we'll come out all right, even if we die and we move on to the next lifetime. So that's basically one thing that we can hold on to, is that if you're engaged in spiritual life, you're not going to last forever anyway. None of us are. And at some point we'll leave this body. And if we've worked to try to purify ourselves and we've made the grade, we'll go back to the spiritual world. If not, we're not quite ready to do that. All right, we'll stay here, but we'll pick up where we left off. Whatever stage of spiritual life we've attained, we will never lose that. That's the one thing we don't lose from incarnation to incarnation. Everything else we do, our status in society, our nation that we supposedly are born in, that we lose when we die, our money, our various skills, our knowledge, all that gets flushed down the toilet when we change bodies. But one thing that we don't lose is our progress in spiritual life. That remains, and as a new child somewhere else, we pick up where we left off. Or if we've made the grade, we leave this whole murky bag behind and we go back to the spiritual world where none of this kind of stuff is going on. But that's why the material world is what it is. It's not a nice place. It never was, never will be. It gets better, it gets worse. But if we can, we should try to make it better. But more important than that is making ourselves better and engaging in spiritual life, because that's what actually will make the difference to the Supreme, because if the Supreme sees that more people are taking to spiritual life, then he will arrange for the various belligerent forces to conquer each other, or to create something that dooms all of them, or gives us a easy way to overcome them, or maybe it won't be so easy, but nevertheless there'll be a way to overcome them. So that's kind of basically how it works as far as I understand it. So I don't bother myself too much about all the details. I try to understand them. And there are numbers of theories, some people take Bob Lazar seriously, some don't. Some take, the alien takeover of our government very seriously, some don't. If it happened, it wouldn't be the first time as far as, our history goes, as far as the Vedas are concerned. It's happened before. So if they've taken over our government, it's not the first time. And then again, maybe they aren't as prominent as we think they are. So all those could be there. But when it all boils down, the important thing is to try to purify yourself, because that's what will make it better for you. And you're doing the very best thing you could do, not only for yourself, but for the environment and for everybody else at the same time. You're doing the very best thing that you could do. And if somewhere along the line there's a battle to be fought, then it'll be clear. And it was clear 5,000 years ago how the battle lines were drawn, and who had to fight who and how it worked. And that's how it was resolved back then. Whether it'll be resolved in a similar fashion in the future, I don't know. Okay.
You want to say anything?
Yeah, if you want.
Yeah, you mentioned war, and it brought to my mind about General Douglas MacArthur. He was a field marshal. He was the head of all the generals and admirals during World War II all over the Pacific. And he warned President Harry Truman not to get involved with Korea in 1950 because of hostile extraterrestrials, because there was too many incidents during World War II that he knew. And there's a book out that's called Military Encounters with Extraterrestrials. It's by Frank Joseph. And he has written every war since World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, even the Desert Wars to today. And many of those military veterans from all different countries all around the world, I have heard their names mentioned at different UFO conferences that I attended around the country. So this book has to be the real deal of when he mentioned all these ex-military veterans from around the world that had encounters with extraterrestrials. He mentioned there was a lot of submarines that went missing by extraterrestrials in the early 1960s. He mentioned many, many things. He said like there was a B-52 that seemed like a giant hand grabbed it out of the sky and just laid it straight down into the jungle. And there was no disturbance of the jungle trees and foliage all around it, like it crashed. And the plane was intact. And there was some certain group of military that went inside the plane and saw the whole cargo bay was filled with bombs. The whole bomb bay was filled. And there was 5 crew members, the pilot, they were in the seat strapped in, and they were totally mutilated. And the blood was drawn. They thought maybe it was the Viet Cong that, they retaliated by doing it, but they figured that it was impossible, that all of that they said it had been something extraordinary that had done this. And they didn't want to leave the cargo bay full of bombs, so they put satchels and blew up the plane. And they couldn't take the bodies because they had to leave the jungle. They knew the area was filled with enemy of Viet Cong. There was many stories like this from World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, to the Desert Wars for over 100 years. And it's disturbing that a lot of ex-military didn't come forward, just like the veterans that were the ex-military veterans that were with Admiral Richard Byrd. I'm saying to myself, how come none of them on those ships have ever written a book about the battle between extraterrestrials and Admiral Richard Byrd in 1946, 1947? So there's too many things that are hidden, and it's very disturbing when it's like almost
so
every
much
country in the world is
redacted
military.
history all over the world.
All over the world. I mean, how has this been hidden from us?
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me share that.
That's unfortunately just the way our world is, that you never hear the whole story of anything.
No, it's just like Marcel. He was brief to hold that thing up, and we lighted it. Oops. Okay.
Yeah. Unless he's finished talking. But.
I'm sorry about that.
Okay, all right, so at any rate, did you want to say something? Okay. Yeah.
Very quick. I know that time is kind of dwindling.
No, I'm fine. If you want.
Just wanted to say, yeah, I got time too, just like you. So I think I'm okay. Yeah, So this stuff that's happening, addressed by, the UFO community and the people. But just like what you said earlier about karma that needs to be burned, these things that cycle through the evil as it were, evil meaning the things that are contrary to the Creator, the things that are contrary to the personality of the divine, the things that are contrary, in other words, the things that are anti-spiritual, the things that are engender more karma and drive people deeper into the hole of consequences, because there's always a consequence to every action, there's always a reaction to every action. these are the natural laws of the universe. You got your debunkers that try to dethrone the existence of God, so-called, whatever they are, call them atheists or something. And then you got your debunkers that try to debunk the unidentified aerial phenomenon, the USOs, the unidentified submerged objects, and the UFOs. And the universe is infinite. We don't even know the mystery of the universe. We only have a concept. So all I can say is that, we've got to have everything lead us into the direction of self-purification, ultimately to our relationship with our divine creator, the one that created our souls and destined our souls to live on this infinite path, whatever it may be. So I think that, if there are benevolent entities such as these things that appear in the heavens, and the books sacred book talks about it all the time. And if it inspires us to get united and to love one another and to love our Creator, and so that we become more unified and more spiritual, and we are led on that spiritual enlightenment and away from the consequences, then so be it, So, but again, it's just and then our lifetimes are so short, right? Before you know it, death is right at the door. So we have such a short time. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. So as you were saying, in the Vedas, we learn that there are 3 ways that you get your karma, and they're called adibhotic, adiatmic, and adidaivic miseries. So there are 3 kind of chutes down which our bad karma comes from. Adibhotic miseries are those that are given to us by other people. So one vector of our suffering comes from other people, and even other things like animals and insects and things like that. They cause us various kinds of suffering. That's called adibhotic. Atmic is miseries we create for ourselves. Like we slam our hand in the door, we worry about something till we develop an ulcer, we fret over something that means nothing, like the way we look in the mirror or our weight or something like that. These are adiatmic miseries we create for ourselves. And then there's adidaivic miseries, which are those miseries that are organized by the demigods themselves, because they are the overteam for organizing how karma gets meted out to us. So sometimes there are large-scale catastrophes like floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, etc., even plagues and those kind of things. Those are miseries that are not caused by any one single individual in this realm, but they're caused by the demigods. So those are 3 ways. Now, for adibhotic miseries, those that are caused by others, generally that happens on a small scale, where you say something aggressive to someone and they hit you or something like that. That's kind of a simple loop of somebody getting their karma. But on a mass scale, that also happens. Sometimes people who normally would get shut down by karma, because usually the way it's like a governor or something like that, like a governor on a mechanical device, where if the mechanical device spins too fast, it shuts the mechanical device down. So as we perform selfish karma that damages ourselves, damages others, and creates a mess in the environment, usually by the agency of karma, we're shut down. Usually that's the way it works, that as we perform activities that are reprehensible, the karma itself destroys our health, destroys our strength, destroys our ability to communicate with other people, destroys our credibility in society, and therefore we are effectively shut down by the system. However, there are cases where that doesn't happen. In cases where, in fact, the other thing happens because a single individual is being used as a springboard or a fulcrum for mass karma. You know, someone who is a tyrant, someone who normally would be shut down by their aggressive and belligerent and selfish behavior. They don't get shut down. Instead, they get empowered. And they're empowered to deliver the negative karma to lots and lots of people on a wholesale scale. So this is the idea of mass karma. And so just as sometimes we have, and usually this is the way it works with adidaivik miseries, we have mass karma as a result of natural disturbances, earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, famines, various kinds of plagues and things like that. We also sometimes have a mass version of adibhotic miseries where we're caused miseries by a whole regime of people doing something, you know, so that's also there. And again, that's why we don't want to be here. There's no advantage to the material world. We think it's the wonderful place because we don't know there's anything else. But the spiritual world is where we really want to be. This place is always going to be like this, more or less, you know. In Roman times, people lived like bugs underneath, you know, some military rule by the Roman government, you know. Now it's different kind of government. They don't have, you know, they don't do it with a spear. They do it with, you know, corporate surveillance and all this other kind of stuff. But it's essentially the same thing. You know, this world just rehashes the same problems in new and ever interesting and innovative ways. But essentially the same thing is going on. So a person who is actually intelligent begins to realize, I need to get out of here. That's why we say there's only one real problem, and that is that we're incarcerated in a body right now and we're thinking that this is our home, when actually we need to gradually purify ourselves and go back to the spiritual world. Now, in that process, we may also go through our own karmic upheavals. There's nothing that says that won't happen. But be it slow, be it fast, be it extreme, or be it more subtle, our karma will eventually bring us to the supreme if we're in the process of really holding on to a process for self-purification. And that's why this happens. It's not an accident. These people who engineer these giant devastations, they're doing it by the hand of karma. They're being empowered by the power of karma to do it. They themselves are reaping that karma. They're going to actually have to suffer for their mass catastrophes that they cause for others at some point, at some different ways. But at the same time, we are ourselves making these things happen. And sometimes even people who are fairly virtuous will be caught up in devastating circumstances. They're burning off some of the last of their karma. Or occasionally the Supreme Lord makes a spotlight on someone to show that this person seemed to do well even in horrible times. You know, in the Bible you have the story of Job, and there's similar stories in the Vedas that sometimes people who are doing all the right things, but yet they're still being dumped on, you know, by external forces. That shows that, you know, we're not fair weather sailors, and once we get out of here, then we're serious about not wanting to come here again, not making the same mistake twice coming to this material world. But the material world provides us this dream that we can follow whatever we like to do and we can be happy this way, but it never works out. It's always the way that the product is touted on the screen, on the television screen, but not what you actually get in the box when you order it. That's the way our material world does us, you know, that we're searching after these dreams that we think we want to fulfill, they're never what we think they are. And in the meantime, we're going through various anxieties and miseries, and we just never catch on. That the reason it's that way is because we don't belong here. And that's what spiritual life is all about, coming to that realization and then doing the work to gradually get out of here. If you do the work more seriously, you know what you're doing, you'll get out of here faster. If you do the work less seriously or you don't know what you're doing, it'll happen much slower. So that's why we talk in that way. All right, so I'm going to cap it at this point. We can talk a little bit more, but I'm going to stop the cameras, and thank you all very much for coming. And this is What's Up With That, UFOs, and today we did discuss government cover-ups, and next session will be January 30, and then after January 30, it won't be till March 5th because I'll be out of the country for the entire month of February. So if you want to look us up on YouTube, we're at Krishna Was Up, KRISHNAWAZZUP. And these meet not every Thursday, but most Thursdays at 26 2nd Avenue in downtown Manhattan. There is a meetup group in New York, so you can join that and learn when exactly it happens. Or you can I guess that's probably the best way to do it. And also, I explain when we're going to meet again on this, so you can also go to YouTube. So thank you again. Hare Krishna.